What's up, everybody? We are Chatty AF. We're here to make you think about themes and stuff. I'm your frontman for tonight's show. I'm Alex, one of the managing editors here at AniFem. I'm also a writer and researcher in the world of queer young adult fiction. I'm joined today by Caitlin and Toni on, well, whatever instruments they want to play to back me up. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Hello again, friend of a friend. I am Caitlin. Hi, I'm Caitlin, the AniFem's community manager, as well as an editor and writer.
Hello, my name is Toni's son, and can I introduce to you this most amazing show? Okay, I'm Toni. I'm a contributing editor here at AniFem, and I am also just an educator and musician. You can find me at Poet Pedagogue on Twitter.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode. Today we are talking about Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, and the Scott Pilgrim, I suppose it's a franchise now, the Scott Pilgrim franchise more broadly. Normally this would not be within our scope, as referential and adoring as it is to Japanese pop culture. It is Canadian, does not normally fall under our umbrella here at Anime Feminist. However, the new animated series that dropped on Netflix this November comes to us from Science Saru, the animation studio that has given us many cool things, but some star favourites including Devilman Crybaby, Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, and The Heiki Story. So Scott Pilgrim is anime now, and good for him, I think. We'll get into that. So this is going to be an interesting one because some of us on the chat today have some familiarity with this series, and some of us have absolutely no familiarity with this series. That's going to be a fun thing to talk our way through, given the nature of these adaptations. Caitlin, can I throw to you first? Can you tell us what you know of Scott Pilgrim? What is your familiarity with this tale?
I don't remember exactly how I ended up reading the comics, but I do remember around when the year after I graduated college, when the last volume came out, or was coming out, my friend shoved all of the volumes at me and was like, here, read it. So I read it. I saw the movie in theaters twice, maybe 3 times. I have cosplayed Ramona. I would say that the only bit of Scott Pilgrim media I am not intimately familiar with is the game, because it is a genre of game I'm terrible at. But I've heard it's very good. And also, the movie came out in 2010. I was born in 1987. Do the math.
You're not making me do math live on air.
I was 23.
Okay, so you were the same.
I was 23 when the movie
So you were the
came
same
out.
age as the characters. That's interesting. Okay.
Yes, I was.
Okay, Toni, how about you?
Well, I'm the odd one out here because I have basically no familiarity whatsoever with the original franchise at all. I was exposed to it entirely through talking to my roommate about the fact that there was a Netflix adaptation and them saying, "Oh, yeah, I love that comic. I will never watch the Netflix adaptation because it is very special to me." And so I was like, okay. And, I had heard about Scott Pilgrim before that, and I think I mostly thought, wow, that sounds like a dumb thing to, have a thing about fighting somebody's evil exes. Isn't that kind of possessive? Weird. Damsel in distress thing. Which obviously, is, a very, very, very shallow read of, of the comic. I mean, not having read
there's
it.
so much more to it.
Absolutely, I'm sure there is. But, and having watched the show, I can't imagine it being that shallow. So, yeah, I'm coming to it fresh, and I will have lots of questions, I'm sure.
All right, Alex, how about you?
Yeah, so I am on the spectrum closer to you, Caitlin, right down to the fact that I do, in fact, still have a very well-loved and beaten-up replica of Ramona's messenger bag. It's the blue one with the pink star on it, which I used and loved for many, many years, but has since been retired. I came to the movie first in 2010, where I will not make you do math, but let's say I was closer to Knives Chau's age than to Scott and the others. So I was kind of like, wow, this is such an interesting, like, vision of a potential young adult future. Yeah, I came to the comics after that and was quite fascinated by sort of the differences I found having seen the movie first. And I was fascinated by differences again now having watched the anime, but we will get to that in time. To provide some context for how we got here. So, as you both said, this began with comics. This is a graphic novel series by Canadian artist Brian Lee O'Malley. This began with Volume 1 was Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life in 2004. This was followed by Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
Which was when I was Knives' age, for the record.
There you go.
I was 17 in 2004.
A distant year of 2004. The distant futuristic year of 2004. This was followed by, we had Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Scott Pilgrim and the Infinite Sadness, Scott Pilgrim Gets It Together, Scott Pilgrim vs. the Universe, and it all concluded with Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour in 2010, which was a big year for the franchise because, as you said, 2010 is also the year we got the live-action movie directed by Edgar Wright. We also had the tie-in game called Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the Game. And so, yeah, this series that drew a lot of inspiration and made a lot of homages to movies, video games, and anime has now been a movie, a video game, and an anime. This was a pretty big staple of geek culture in the 2000s and kind of, I want to say, the early 2010s. Although it's, it's persisted through. It's pretty beloved. Especially following the release of the movie, it was a pretty big deal around even like I, who wasn't super active in the convention scene or anything like that at the time. I remember seeing like a lot of cosplay, a lot of merch, a lot of like general buzz about this series.
It is worth noticing that it wasn't really successful in crossing over out of the geek community because the movie was considered a flop. It did not make its budget back.
One of those, we may call it a cult classic, I suppose. But I wonder if I don't know, I would like to know your opinion on this, Caitlin. Do you reckon it kind of hit this interesting little sweet spot where it was obviously very inspired by and had a lot of the vibe of like, yeah, manga, anime, video games, but it was, from the distant foreign land of Canada. It was an English language comic set in a setting that would have been more familiar to like North American fans especially, and it's like, oh wow, this really video gamey plot can happen in Toronto, a place that I kind of recognize. Like, I don't know, do you think that was a factor in what kind of made it seem so cool and novel?
I mean, I had never been to Toronto. Like,
so it could be like this in real life.
I grew up in Los Angeles, which might as well have been Australia when it comes to familiarity with Toronto. So I don't know if it's that necessarily. I think that Toronto itself is, they reference this in the anime. It's like Toronto itself is a character because they reference a lot of real life locations. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't exist anymore, sadly, because gentrification has destroyed a lot of the smaller businesses. Honest Mike's.
We'll check
I
that
don't
in
know.
post. Honest
the place where yeah. That's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So the way you phrase the question implied a little bit of like, it's like my Japanese mangas, but it's more local, and I don't think that's like it wears that influence on the sleeve, but I don't know. Even as someone who was deep in the weeb weeds when they read Scott Pilgrim, if anything, that I think that might have hurt it, because anime and manga fans are very, very quick to reject something that tries to ape anime and manga.
Okay. In any case, it sits in this interesting in-between kind of space. What is it actually about? We can talk about its various, influences sort of along the way, but what is the actual story that we've got going on here with the comics and then the movie? It's about Scott. It's about a guy named Scott. He describes himself as being between jobs. He's an aspiring musician in his early 20s, living in, as we have said, the magical foreign land of Toronto, Canada. He's in a band that sucks. He's dating a high school student because, in his own words, it's an easier relationship where the expectations are low and they just kind of hang out and hold hands sometimes. She's obsessed with him and thinks the moon that shines out of him, and he's just kind of coasting along, trying to rebound from his most recent breakup. This is our hero, everybody. Hooray. He's also been having dreams about a girl with colourful hair rollerblading through a kind of ethereal space, and is very surprised to meet her in person and discover that she's real. He learns her name is Ramona. He engineers a situation that means they can meet again and asks her on a date. They go out, they kind of hit it off, and then their new romance is rudely interrupted when it turns out that every person Ramona has ever dated before has formed a league of evil exes, and Scott has to video game style fight each of them if he wants to win the right to be her new boyfriend. The series uses the structure of the evil ex fights to kind of tell a story about Scott and Ramona's growing relationship as they're each forced to sort of confront their past mistakes and flaws and work out what a successful romance even is. Like, sure, you can punch her ex-boyfriend until he turns into coins, but does that mean you're actually compatible as people? It's kind of the question that it asks going forward. So, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off adapts the early part of the story more or less exactly. Shows Scott dreaming about Ramona and then meeting her, all the way up to the first fight with Evil Ex number 1, Matthew Patel. And then it diverges completely by having Scott lose that fight. And it looks like he's frickin' died.
The way I like to describe it is the first episode is exactly what you expect into the last minute, and then it's nothing like you expect.
Which is a bit cheeky of them, honestly. Like, especially because a lot of the marketing material was billing this as a new adaptation. Especially it was kind of like, you know, because it got a lot of the old, or I think all of the old, from the ancient year of 2010, the movie live action cast was brought back to voice their characters again, and it was really amping that up, like the kind of nostalgia factor, like it's Scott Pilgrim again in a lot of the marketing, which is very mischievous of them to do that, knowing that they do this twist in the very first episode. They're like, actually, we've killed Michael Cera and turned him into coins. So they do walk this back. It turns out that Scott is not dead. He has been pulled through a portal. But we still have this thing going on where Scott Pilgrim, the hero of Scott Pilgrim, has been quite literally pulled out of the narrative. And so we get something very different now that he's not quite in it. And I would like to know what you thought of this twisty twist, of this turning into something very different.
I loved it. I was grinning with delight when I realized, it took me a second to realize what had happened, because I was just like, well, he's going to fight Matthew Patel and, and he's going to win. And then Matthew Patel is standing there going, I won? And I'm just like, what? And I'm watching with Jared, and we're both like, what? Wait a second.
And then roll credits. And it leaves you sitting with that feeling.
Yeah. No, it does. You just I was so ready for anything it was going to throw at me. And I adored the whole series.
So Toni, then, from your perspective as someone coming into this new and, as you said, really only knowing kind of the premise, how did this make you feel? The first episode throwing this at you.
Well, it kind of made me feel similar to when I watched Executioner and Her Way of Life.
Yes.
Which, the thing is that I have absolutely zero investment in isekai, so I unlike many of y'all, I've not been forced to watch a million different isekai for reviewing purposes. So watching that, I didn't quite experience the catharsis that I'm sure many of you all did, both watching a stupid isekai protagonist be shanked in the head or watching Scott Pilgrim be shanked in the head. And I think that what I'd heard, though, from so many different people is that so much of Scott Pilgrim is partially about how Scott kind of sucks. He is not responsible. He's not a thoughtful person. He's certainly a mess, and Yeah, so it was interesting to like kind of think about like, okay, so what would this series be like if it was focusing more on Ramona and like her narrative completely independent of Scott's. Although I mean it is dependent on him in the sense that she's trying to find him, but independent in the sense that she's having these individual like relationships with these different exes that she's trying to resolve, like um and it feels almost like it's become more about that than it is necessarily about finding Scott. Like, kind of her reflecting on her life and the choices that she's made, and the kind of patterns that the unhealthy patterns that she's noticed. Like she tends to enter into.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, I really enjoyed the series. I I think that the ending and I mean should we be spoiling things?
I think we can
Yeah.
take this as
Yeah.
a spoiler cast.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's just dive in and chew it all up.
Yeah, the ending where it turns out the villain is Scott himself as an older person, I thought really was and we can get more into this later. I think we will. But I think it really hammered home that I think part of what the series was doing was trying to ask question some of the assumptions maybe of the original comic, and question where the original comic leaves its characters, right? Um, and whether their journey was perhaps as transformative as it should have been. But I don't know. I'm curious. Like in the original comic, is does Scott actually grow from the beginning to the end, or does it really
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
Scott was left to his own devices, he would become this character that he is in this anime, which is, I mean, the antagonist who is kind of terrible.
Oh, yeah. He grows a lot. He grows a lot. I just reread the whole comic in the last couple of days. He has to go, he goes through a whole journey, especially towards the end. His life falls apart. Ramona disappears on him. He and Wallace get kicked out of their apartment, so he's like drifting from sleeping in other friends' beds to other friends' beds. And then Gideon shows up, and he has to really like figure out his life. He has to reconcile with his exes, and like take a look at himself and his own role, because Ramona finds out that he went on his date with her when he was already dating Knives. Like, it's a whole thing. And Ramona also has to do a lot of reflecting as well. Just the focus is more on Scott.
Yeah, and this is a good segue actually into something I wanted to talk about with the movie, which I recognize you also have not seen, Toni, but except for saying you had a look at it, we're not necessarily very impressed by some of the choices that you saw. So the movie is maybe, as movie adaptations often are, even if it was a flop, it's probably the better known version of the story, or at least the one that got a lot of people into it. And let me know if you agree with this, Caitlin. The movie was very fun, but I kind of had two main gripes with it. The first is that because it is, a movie adaptation of a longer series, it compresses the timeline quite a lot. So maybe the movie's version of the story takes place over a couple of weeks, whereas the comics takes place over like months and months, maybe even a whole year.
About a year.
Thank you. Yeah. So what you get from that is a much more slow burn sense of character development. For Scott, as you said, him really having to pull his head out of his ass and grow as a person in a very gradual kind of way. It also means that you get like Ramona and Scott actually being together for months and months, so you get a much stronger sense of their actual relationship and how they work as a couple and what they're actually fighting for, so to speak. So the movie is very much missing that sense of gradual growth, and specifically the second gripe that I have is a little bit to do with casting and direction and how that kind of skews some of the characterization. Specifically, I think Michael Cera's Scott is a different beast to the Scott from the comics in a way that impacts the character arc and the way that relationship is portrayed. What do you think of that?
Yes, I agree. I love I love the movie. It is very different from the comic in a lot of ways, but I'm fine with that because I expect adaptations to be different, and there's a lot of stuff with the comic that you can't do with the movie. I've had a lot of conversations with this about this with people lately. I don't think that there would be an actor who could kind of pull off the comic version of Scott the same like you would want Michael Cera, or like you would want for the movie. I think Michael Cera was a different Scott, but he was a good Scott for what you needed from for the film. Like, for example, Michael Cera, not a good looking guy. He's funny. He's charming. He seems, I would love to hang out with him. Not really good looking guy by most people's standards. Whereas in the comic, like, it comes across that, like, Scott is, like, nerdy cute. And so Michael Cera adds kind of this, like, kind of pathetic nerd charm that I think Scott's a little bit douchier in the comic.
Mm-hmm. I think
he still has the like nerd. He still has like nerd charm, but like people keep saying like, Scott, if your life had a face, I would punch it because like he keeps getting away with shit.
I do love that line. Is that from Kim?
Yeah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head here.
Y'all. I mean, like, I relevant to this. I was like looking up who played who in the adaptation, and I looked up Kim Pine, and the first thing that pops up is an image of Kim Pine kissing Scott, and I'm like, wait, did they kiss in the comic? I don't like that.
Yeah, they dated. They dated in high school.
Yeah, they're exes.
Oh. Ah, gotcha. Understood now. I thought for a moment that Scott, this was an Araragi situation where he,
No.
Okay.
No. Listen, Scott's exes show up.
Okay.
And it's, thematic resonance and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but
okay,
I think
I suppose it's worth...
Sorry,
well,
you go, Toni.
I was just going to say, I suppose it's worth mentioning now what my gripe with the movie is. I hate the costumes so much.
No,
the costume and
but
makeup work is so atrocious.
It's
and I know it's accurate to the
time.
Comic,
it's of the time. That was 2010, baby.
I was in high school in 2010, and people were not dressed that garishly.
I mean,
from what I remember.
It's an aesthetic choice. Like, the movie is very, like, flashy. I don't think it's a lot of the... Because, like, Scott wears a lot of, like, band t-shirts.
I'm thinking about Matthew Patel in particular.
Oh, well, he's a weird theater nerd.
That's true, I guess. I mean, sort of.
They make fun of him. They make fun of him.
The transition from comic to live action is always
they're just like, what, are pirates in or something? Like they make fun of him for dressing like that.
I know. There's something about the original comic though that makes it look like less horrendous, even though it's the same outfit.
Well,
I don't know why.
They're both very like the movie is also very stylized. It does fit in with the movie aesthetic, I would say.
Okay.
This is true. The movie is very stylish, which again is Edgar Wright having a time of his life with editing and special effects and comic booky nonsense, which he's great at. The movie's fun. But I think earlier you hit the nail on the head.
And to be clear, yeah, sorry.
Earlier you hit the nail, Caitlin, I think, with describing Scott as like Michael Cera, Scott specifically, as nerdy and cute, because I think he is a much cuter, wetter version of Scott. And
wetter.
At the same time, Mary Elizabeth Winstead's Ramona is much more kind of like cool and deadpan. And again, because you have this compressed timeline, you don't necessarily get to unpack these characters in the same way. So they're maybe a bit more archetypal, and they kind of, you still take the time to, for want of a better word, kind of deconstruct this idea of like, Ramona's the manic pixie dream girl that you have to literally fight to win.
No, she's a train wreck. And yes. I think the biggest issue with the movie I have had, and I understand why they made these decisions, because A, the last volume of the comic wasn't out, and B, that time compression. But the ending for Ramona hit so much harder in the comic. It is both of them reaching, kind of having to work towards this place where they can be a couple. Whereas in the movie, it's just like, well, Ramona's being controlled by Gideon and Scott has to beat him.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You lose a bit of the nuance with that really compressed timeline. And again, I think with some of the sort of storytelling and directorial choices they had to make to, you know, go for a certain cool factor, to simplify the story, to pare it down into, you know, a 90-minute length or whatever. All of which is very interesting because, of course, now we have Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, which feels very consciously... Which, by the way, yeah, is like written by Brian Lee O'Malley, or co-written by him at least, who is the original creator.
Blom.
And
Blom is the fans call him.
What do they call him? Sorry?
Blom. I don't know if fans actually call him that. I just like saying
They
Blom.
do now. You're a fan. You're calling him that. It's also executive.
That's right.
It's also executive produced by Edgar Wright. So he's like, I don't know. It felt very, again, with all this nostalgia in the marketing, being like, it's like the movie you remember, and then the series it felt like a very conscious, like, you know, kind of like returning to this story, older and wiser, and playing it out again in a different way, in a way that was very self-aware and very referential to the movie. To the point where they are at one point on a movie set basically making the Edgar Wright movie because someone dropped the script off.
The Edgar Wrong.
Oh yes, Edgar Wrong.
The name of the director in that was Edgar Wrong.
Yeah.
And like Simon Pegg and
Nick Frost turn up as
Nick
voice
Holt
cast as well. That was cute.
They had that was just like a fun little cameo.
Yes, those are two actors.
Clear,
that
I am a fan of Edgar Wright. Like, I'm not an Edgar Wright hater here.
I think you should watch the movie if you like Edgar Wright.
I love Hot Fuzz. I think Hot Fuzz is a fantastic movie. And then The World's End was very formative for me growing up. Like, The World's End was like, yeah, it's just one of my favorite movies. Like at the end of high school. But anyways,
you should watch Scott. You should watch the Scott Pilgrim movie then.
I think it would be fascinating to have watched Scott Pilgrim Takes Off first and then go back to the 2010 movie. I think that would be a fascinating, time travel exercise, which, fittingly enough, for Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. So we've talked about, we have kind of various versions of Scott across comic, movie, and now Takes Off, which again, Takes Off kind of follows this to a certain extreme and is like, well, actually, remember how Scott wasn't actually a great guy in the comic and had to learn and grow? We've extrapolated on that to the point where he has become the alternate antagonist in the series.
The eighth evil X.
The eighth evil X, exactly. Which, by the way, I am obsessed with the fact that is a plot point in this show. In fact, the final confrontation of the show is actually the love interests from this comic that you liked. They fucking got divorced. And now one of them is going back in time to try and make sure the relationship never happens in the first place. And that is fascinating. As like, you know, your like what happens next, like your continuation of your beloved pop culture series. It's like, oh, what happened to my OTP? It's like they got turbo divorced and created a time wormhole about it.
And went back in time when one of them went back in time to make sure that they would still meet.
Yeah, which like I don't know, maybe we'll talk more about the ending in a minute, but we've talked a bit about Scott as antagonist. Can we talk a bit about Ramona as protagonist? Because that is, as we said, kind of the new thing that we get when Scott is literally ripped out of the narrative by himself. It turns out he's his own worst enemy. We then get a lot of screen time with Ramona, which we obviously got a lot of screen time with Ramona before, but as we've said, she was kind of like, you know, regardless of the level of depth that she was allowed by the various narratives, she was always kind of like, the series is very much like Scott's point of view, so she was always kind of like in the role of love interest. But now it's kind of done a switcheroo. So instead of this story where Scott is like fighting to get Ramona, we now have Ramona solving mysteries to get Scott. And I don't know, having met her for the first time through this format, Toni, what did you think of Ramona? What do you think of her?
I thought Ramona was definitely interesting character. I It was funny when I first put on the show. I watched like the first 5 minutes. I know my roommate keeps making surprise guest appearances as a character in our podcast, but
It's okay. Jared's a recurring character.
but they noticed that they reframed the opening shots of the show so that instead of it being kind of this kind of comical, like, dude, this is a dream, like, why are you making such a big deal, like, quit being, which is a very dismissive attitude that Ramona takes towards Scott, towards a more romanticized kind of like thing, where she's not making fun of him, the narrative's not making fun of him, it is like uncritically a romantic thing. And I thought that was interesting because then I actually felt like I got to know Ramona in the show itself, she embodies this very like wry, slightly sarcastic, slightly an unsentimental character, to the point like where after Scott died, I was like a little bit surprised at like the way that it's not that she immediately moved on or something, but more that she like seemed kind of at first like really unbothered by it, just like, oh, he's dead. Well, very matter of fact. And then over the course of the series, kind of seeing her like kind of confront her ambivalence in a sense, right? Like confront all the ways that like when situations got difficult, she kind of just shrugged her shoulders and walked away, right? And I felt like that made it make more sense, right? And also there were certain moments in the series that I just found incredibly profound, especially with my favorite episode I think was the one where she was kind of confronted by her old college roommate, right? Slash lover. Like, I've really, really connected with that episode because I've definitely been in situations where people, instead of trying to sort through mess, just walk away from it, right? And I've been thinking a lot recently about just how much, like, our avoidance of our propensity to conflict avoidance sometimes, and temptation to just kind of walk away from things that have gotten like even a little messy, how much harm that can do, right? When people are disposable. I was even listening to this podcast this book by Naomi Klein called Doppelganger, in which she talks about how kind of the online attitude where you can just block or mute anybody who you're kind of a little grumpy with and basically disappear them from your life without them knowing that you've disappeared them from your life. Especially if you mute them. They have no idea you muted them, so they're basically not even, like kind of carries over into how we can treat, like, the people around us, right? And, where if we want them to not be present at all, then we can just, like, bam, they're gone, and we never have to think about them again.
It's a good thing this story takes place before the invention of social media, because both Ramona and Scott would be insufferable on it, I think. Sorry, as you were saying.
Oh my god.
It's a period piece. It's important, as you were saying.
But yeah, I guess I just have been thinking a lot lately about this idea of kind of disposability politics, and which is different from cancel culture, right? But like the idea that we don't actually owe each other anything, or we don't have any responsibility to each other to sort through mess, to conflict resolve, to do anything, to be in community with each other, and that, at any time we could just drop off the face of the earth, and that the other person just has to be okay with that, right? And I've been thinking about that so much, and also the fact that, like, the tension between, like, on one hand, that is the nature of relationships, and if we weren't allowed to do that, then relationships would be, really fucked up and abusive, right? Like, we need to be able to, like, for any reason, drop out of these things, right? But also, at the same time, it's like, but we do have that ethical commitment. That just because we should be allowed to do something doesn't mean that it's not fucked up and wrong sometimes, you know?
I think you've really hit on like one of the fundamental things about Scott Pilgrim, and that the things that Scott Pilgrim takes over is in conversation with from the original, is that Ramona has always been the one who leaves. She is the one who she takes off at the first sign of conflict. And so now Scott has disappeared in the middle of nowhere. And if anything, she seems to be one of the more like concerned people at his funeral. But I just chalk that up to Scott. A lot of Scott Pilgrim operates on dream logic. It's kind of it's true. It's kind of like got magical realism vibes. Now she is confronting not just the mystery of what happened to Scott, but, you know, her own history with her exes. What she did to Roxy when she was just like, yeah, I was just experimenting. I'm out of here. Bye. How her dumping Lucas Lee for Todd Ingram. She kind of messes people. She disappears, and that messes people up, and she's having to deal with that. And her older self is the one saying, like, yeah, I was done running away, but Will Fort Scott has decided that he wanted to run away. I loved how how did the cast members, who are mostly 38 years old, feel about calling 37-year-old Scott old Scott? But that was very much from the point of view of, you know, a 23-year-old, you know. To a 23-year-old, 37 does seem old.
Yeah, I was also impressed that, like, Wallace has gone grey by like 39 as well. I was like, I guess he's had a very stressful life, what with being Scott's roommate and all.
Well, some people just go grey early.
Blame Scott for every silver hair that he has. I'm sure
I'm sure he does.
I think that's fair. Talking about Ramona's exes, though, and talking about the third episode, because I felt like that was much stronger a take on her relationship with her exes, and it's especially interesting to me that Roxy goes first and has that beautiful, you know, first of all, a beautifully animated fight scene, which is just like they're like them fighting in the video shop and falling through all the different movie set pieces for no reason other than, as you said, dream logic, and also it's cool. And just, yeah, this like really raw emotional conflict between the two of them, which we kind of didn't get in the original. Like, the movie especially is very, again, because of the compressed timeline, but also because it's 2010, Roxy's kind of a joke. The idea that, like,
bi-furious.
Yes. It's like
not bi-furious.
Yeah. Which admittedly is kind of, that's a good line, but it's not, like, amazing in, you know, the context of representation. It's very just like, what is Scott's
very
line?
good.
He figures out that Roxy is one of Ramona's exes, and it's like, wait, you had a sexy phase? Like, that's what he says. And again, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, she fares a bit better in the comics because, again, the comics have more time. She also gets defeated in a different way, which is slightly less embarrassing for her.
Yeah, I didn't like how the movie handled that.
Which, like, because for context, Toni, and correct me, remembering this wrong, Caitlin, Roxy is defeated because Ramona's like, oh, if you touch her behind her knee, she's really sensitive. And so Scott does that, and Roxy basically goes, ooh, and kind of has, like, a very, you know, kind of pleasure moment and collapses to the floor. Which, A, is like, oh, man, but also, B, that wasn't her thing in the comics. That was envy. That was an envy trait, and they took that from envy and gave it to Roxy instead. So Roxy gets done a little, I don't know, I was going to say, I don't want to say Roxy gets done dirty in the 2010 movie, but maybe I think it's fair to say that Roxy gets done a bit dirty in the 2010 movie. And so, very interesting that we get this more nuanced picture of all the exes. And again, very interesting that Roxy goes first to kind of set that tone, to be like, no, this is what this story is about now. It's about taking these kind of more one-dimensional characters who were, literally the bosses in the video game that is Scott's romantic relationship, and sort of humanizing them more and actually looking at the relationships and implying much more of a actual relationship between her and Ramona than we initially got. And I mean, because Roxy's episode was so strong, I kind of felt like the Lucas and Todd episodes that came after were a bit weak sauce and kind of random, but
I loved those episodes.
Okay.
I don't know what you're talking about. Like, everyone on the internet's talking about Scott Pilgrim Yuri. I'm here for the Scott Pilgrim Yowie.
But they were cowards. They only showed kissing. Cowards. All of them. And that kissing was on the movie set, too.
yeah, that was like,
Okay,
that was
anyways.
not a plotline I was expecting. It's just like, just, how are we developing Todd Ingram as a character? Well, he's going to realize that he likes men, get dumped by Wallace, and then revoke his veganism by, like, sadness eating a bunch of poutine. I'm like, okay, well, if that's the direction you want to take with this character, that's fine by me. Actually,
No, it was not at all what I expected, but
I am
Another-
happy to... Sorry.
I thought it was another delightful surprise.
I was happy to see Wallace getting some. I mean, that was my main kind of thing, is that Wallace is a very fun character.
Oh,
watching
I
him-
love Wallace.
So watching him get some was satisfying.
I figured you would like Wallace.
Wallace is fun. Wallace is like my kind of guy. Wallace
Wells, drunk homosexual.
Wallace Wells, just he's basically me, so it's okay.
I wasn't gonna say it. I wasn't gonna say it.
But you were thinking it, weren't you?
I was.
again, what?
I was.
well,
Also,
Wallace is great.
in the comic, he always read as kind of like Asian to me, which is why I was surprised when
Interesting.
he was cast as Kieran Culkin.
Well, that's
Although
my
Kieran
thing
Culkin
about.
was amazing in it in that role.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that that's my other gripe with the movie, is that there's so many characters who I frankly think come across as not white, who are cast as white people. And I'm like, why? And I know Jason Lee, I mean, Lucas Lee's based on Jason Lee, so, like, okay, maybe that you can get away with that, that's fine. But yeah, like, Wallace Wells, that boy is not white, come on. Just stop.
Well,
especially in
while
Toronto. Toronto is like such a like Canada in general is extremely Asian, and Toronto in particular is very Asian. So like removing that aspect to me removes a key aspect of what makes Toronto an interesting place. Yeah, I find that very frustrating personally.
Well, on that, do we want to talk about Knives? Miss Knives Chau, the high schooler. Because she also got a bit of a different spin in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off that, yeah, is another interesting redo on some of the main female characters. What do we think of Knives?
Yeah. Like, my feeling with Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is it asks, the comic is from Scott's perspective. Everything is kind of revolving around Scott. The characters have their own lives and their own relationships, but it's all kind of filtered through Scott's lens, and he is the pivotal relationship for a lot of characters, such as Knives. And so the question is, what if Scott wasn't there, farting around, being an idiot, like messing up, not messing up, that feels unfair, but you know what I mean, just being a human wrecking
you can
ball.
say it. You can say it.
He's a human wrecking ball. And Knives is instead of being the girl who is admiring her boyfriend play in his shitty band, she becomes a musician. She does not spend all of her time competing against Ramona. She's able to figure out her own self much more. And I thought it was a really satisfying arc.
I thought her line at the end was very sweet, where she said, "I'm glad that you're alive, but I'm also glad that you died," which is such a like. Yeah, I Knives I think got a much more quiet, maybe a bit more subtle kind of arc, but it was very like I agree it was very satisfying, and it was very like I still kind of had this question of like, don't you have any friends your own age? Why are you still hanging around with all these 20-something-year-olds? But also, yeah, she is the missing ingredient. She makes the band not suck. Like, then, you know, it turns out she's like a musical prodigy who can learn bass in 4 hours or whatever. And I like, you know, that she begins like mournfully wearing Scott's jacket everywhere and then slowly takes it off as it goes along. And, you know, I felt that...
By the way, I just want to express real quick how happy it made me when Envy Adams came out and started singing "I Will Remember You," and it was metric.
I was not. I didn't know it was a cover.
Scott Pilgrim
I didn't
Takes
get
Off.
the kind of the gag with that, but I was like,
"Oh no, that's a super iconic song."
Oh.
Did you not know? Oh my god! Come on.
My god, are we too
Listen,
young?
The only things I listen to are avant-garde classical music and house music they play at raves. Okay, so leave me alone.
And anime opening themes.
Oh my god! I'm
That too.
dropping
That
this
too.
in the
That is
Disc.
true.
I'm dropping the Wikipedia article in the Discord. No.
I will say, I was like kind of disappointed we didn't get much Envy Adams content in this because I really liked her. But then again, I recognize like she did get quite a satisfying arc and conclusion in the comics and got a lot more screen time, so maybe that's why. But still, I was like, where is she? It was me at the back shouting, Envy,
Yeah, and also
Envy.
she's not gonna figure very heavily into Ramona's story.
Yeah, though I liked, I don't know.
Poor Envy, her boyfriend figured out he was attracted to men and
lost his vegan powers.
lost his vegan powers.
Which, oh yeah, by the way, Toni, if you're vegan, you get superpowers. This is established lore in the comics, which how and why is not really explained, so I can't explain it any more than that. But
I asked my roommate about this again, and like, I asked them, and they were just like, he has vegan powers. It's just vegan powers.
With Scott,
that's all there is to it.
You just roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they introduce something weird like that, you just go with it. You don't question it. Just accept it.
I know in the notes we have something about talking about the epic time traveling divorce and midlife crisis stuff.
Yep.
I actually kind of do want to talk about that.
Let's talk about that
there is
to round us
some
out.
stuff there because like I have some thoughts on that. And
Well,
like
the time traveling turbo divorce, as I will call it. You can imagine that appearing in big cartoony font above my head as I say that.
Okay, part of my confusion with that was like, does this show operate along like the theoretical physics branching timelines kind of time travel mechanics where like when you go back in time you create a new timeline where you've gone back in time? Or
Scott does say something about his memories changing.
Oh.
It's kind of glossed over.
Yeah, I think in the same way that a lot of the other sci-fi elements are glossed over. I don't know. I mean, just judging by the fact that, well, whoever it is like, how did you build a time machine? You're like, oh, the twins helped me with it. It's super easy. They got a robot. It's fine. It's kid stuff. And they just like keep talking. Like, you know, I think it's like, as with, you know, the dream logic of everything.
To me,
like,
that's...
And then they sing the Bubblegum Crisis theme song.
Oh my god. And then there was that moment where Roxy fucking sings the hamster dance on her way out of the VHS store, and I like died.
By the way, Toni, for context, the scene where they're showing footage from the Clash at the Demon Head concert and like everyone in the audience is singing along.
Yeah.
That was the song from the movie.
Mm.
And it did for a second for me really feel like being at a concert where everyone is singing along with the band's iconic song. It just, yeah. It just, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, just, it really taps into the nostalgia bomb without, like, being really aggressively like, are you nostalgic now, millennial woman?
I mean, especially in that, it's like, are you nostalgic for this? Okay, we're taking it all apart, doing it again differently. Like, I feel like that's a pretty big factor in, like, it's not just going back and polishing itself and showing you the shininess. It's just like, okay, you remember this. Like, it's relying on a lot of audience prior knowledge and expectations to do all of its, twists and turns. Which again is why, like, yeah, like Scott fucking died. The title changing to Scott Pilgrim fucking dies at the end of the first episode is so interesting, because you're like, well, that's not how I was expecting that to go. That's not how I know that goes. And again, the whole time travel thing of being like, well, there is an alternate, this is an alternate timeline. The timeline that's already happened is the movie and the comics. Like, that's the story you already know. And the characters from that story have come back to try and stop that story that we already know from taking place. Like, it's so meta and delicious in that way.
And just seeing them making the movie that people have seen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I also
layers
think,
within
like,
layers.
okay, here's the reason why I asked that question earlier, though, about time travel. Because that really matters to me about character motivation for the antagonist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they trying to prevent themselves from having to experience this horrible thing, and so they can erase their memories of the horrible thing, a la what's that movie called, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind sort of thing?
Good movie.
Or fantastic movie. Or are they trying to, like, create a new world and, be altruistic to a different version of themselves that will then get to experience a better future, right? That matters to me, because, like, the beauty of the ending to me, if she indeed is choosing to make this choosing to stay with Scott, even though it's going to turn out badly, right? It really reminds me of, like, what I love so much about Arrival, right? And the ending of Arrival, right? Have y'all seen Arrival?
I have not actually seen Arrival. I need to.
I haven't seen it either, but...
I'm sorry. I know. It's a movie about linguistics.
Okay, first of all, you need to watch it and you'll love it, Caitlin. It's fantastic.
I know. It's made for me.
It is a fantastic movie. But to me, this idea that, like, even though you know that the future is going to turn out poorly, right? And that you can kind of see where things are going, right? And you can see, like, what direction, like, your romance with somebody is going to go in, that you still then choose to, like, let it happen and like experience it fully, because you yourself in the moment know that it feels right for you now in this moment. I think that's something really interesting to me.
The Unlimited X works. I'm sorry, that's a Fate Stay Night reference.
No, yeah. Well, fucking older Scott turns up with darker skin and white hair and tries to kick his younger self's ass. That is the big twist in Unlimited Blade Works.
Yeah.
Not to,
And here's the
spoil
thing.
20-year-old visual novel on this podcast.
Yeah, sorry. Here's the thing though, Toni. I would be surprised if Scott thought that far through. Scott's an idiot.
Mm-hmm. No, for me it's Ramona, though. Ramona's the one who chooses to stay with Scott. That's what I'm saying.
Mm.
Yeah, and, like, Ramona, too, is the one who went back in time, was like, well, look, maybe my time-traveling separated husband is going to try and erase this, but I wanted you to know the story still, and so that's why I dropped the script on young Neil's desk. Like, that was really interesting. And that idea of, like, it pairs very nicely with the ending of the comic, because that was also quite uncertain, but kind of hopeful in a way that I really enjoyed, because it's not a straightforward, and they lived happily ever after, like, despite all of the zany video gamey stuff going on, it's a very grounded ending in that it's Scott and Ramona being like, maybe this will work, we just have to give it a shot. And it's like this imagery of them kind of jumping into the unknown together, literally. And so this kind of felt like, like a return to that in a really interesting way of just like, look, maybe you're gonna have some good times, and then you're gonna get time traveling turbo divorced. But, does that negate the good times? Does that mean it's not worth it? Does it mean that, like, if you know this is a possibility, you can't work to change it and become a better person and stop those mistakes from happening? Like, because, like, I don't know, like, as a romance story, because ultimately this is a romance, it's a story about Scott trying to get the girl and, or in this case, Ramona trying to get her boy. That's just, like, fascinating to me. Like, building that romantic uncertainty into the plot and into the ending, being like, listen, maybe it won't work out, but are you choosing to go ahead and, be happy for now and try to work on it and try to do your best? Okay, yeah, you are choosing that, because that's all we can do as humans. We can't try to make a perfect timeline where you never break up, because that's unhinged. Like, I thought that was such an interesting return.
And that's part of why I feel like it's so in conversation with the comic from an older, more experienced perspective, because Brandon Lee O'Malley was about the same age as the characters when he started it, and now he is much older. Now he is older than old Scott. Not older than very old Scott. But it just feels like, because Scott Pilgrim is messy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a messy work in the way, like, I always say that I love Fushigi Yugi for its mess, right? And I love Scott Pilgrim in the same way. It is art created in the moment by a young, creative person who is working through some stuff, drawing from their own life. Because as we all know, in the case of Fushigi Yugi, Uwatase did go to another world and summon a... No. Anyway. But yeah, like... And so Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, instead of trying to be the more polished version of Scott Pilgrim, it looks at the themes of Scott Pilgrim and says, now we're older, now we're more experienced, we're more cynical, we've been through different kinds of heartbreak. We also see our exes in different ways. So much of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is looking at Ramona's exes as humans and them being able to kind of find their own place of peace. That's why at the end Scott's like, okay, let's go. And they're like, dude, we are so over this. We have moved on. We are like, because a lot of it was the thematic element of it in the comic was Ramona has not dealt with her own breakups. It is an older and wiser Brandon Lee O'Malley looking back and saying, this is my relationship with the characters now. This is my relationship with who I was. And I think that's why it hits so hard, because I was the same age as the characters, and there were parts of Ramona that I really, really related to. Reading the comic really just like brought it back. The part at the end where she's like, yeah, I was trying to outrun change. Like, whew, I was, I had just graduated from college. I spent a year living in the town, in the city where I went to college. And then I moved to Japan, and like people kept coming and going. Just like that hit me in the chest, like Ramona with her hammer. And so seeing it kind of revisit those themes in a way that now connects with me in my mid-30s, I think that's why I love it. I mean, I know that's why I love it so much. Plus, it's super fun, and the animation's amazing, and it's got great needle drops. And that's why I wanted to hear your perspective, Toni, because it feels so much... I can't imagine how someone would take it when they are not a millennial who read the comics at a time in the life where they were in a similar place to the characters.
Well, the funny thing is, to me, is that, like, I mean, I'm watching this as somebody who's in a similar place to the characters.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Right? Like, I mean, admittedly, I'm a little bit older than them, and I'm much more established in my career than probably they are, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, I'm like 28. The characters are like 23, but still, it is this very interesting like. It was a very interesting thing for me to watch this reflection of a lot of the things I've been trying to figure out about like my own life in terms of like how do I have like meaningful romantic relationships, right? That don't require me to sacrifice my values, but also require me to grow a little bit and be a better person. How do I um like maintain like friendships with people through mess, right? Which I mean the show is about mess and like trying to maintain like your your care for other people and like the importance of that, right? Like even when mess happens. And I think that there's um yeah, I really connected with it and it made me really interested in reading the comics. I'll be honest, I really am very interested in reading the comics now, and I'll be honest, I'm still not particularly interested in watching the movie, just but that I think is also just partly because I think I tend to like animated and comic book forms more.
Mm-hmm.
It was really something special, and
Mm-hmm.
I still think my favorite episode was episode 3 though. The Roxy is my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Like what a fantastic episode.
Mm-hmm.
And the animation, I will also say, was just spectacular throughout it.
Incredible animation.
I'm so glad they got Science Saru to do it because they were really the perfect team for this show.
I think that is a very thematically beautiful place to wrap us up for today. There's a lot more to talk about, of course. There's so many things. We could dig so much deeper into Ramona and Knives and Kim, even deeper into the exes. We haven't even talked about Gordon Goose and Julie becoming like an evil power couple, which is so fucking funny.
Gideon
Oh my
Graves,
God.
the poor little meow meow.
Yes,
Poor little meow meow
He is
Gideon
such
Graves.
a poor little meow meow.
He was not a poor little meow meow in the comic, I'll tell you that.
Honestly, Julie getting her dues, good to see her get more screen time and just be an asshole and get what she deserves in a positive way. So much more.
Quick question before we go,
Yes.
before we sign off though. Did you watch English or Japanese?
Oh.
I watched the English. I will say I liked most of the vocal performances, but I believe it was Alison Pill as Kim. Kim's the video store employee, right?
Yeah. And the drummer.
That was the only voice acting that I thought was absolutely terrible. But in terms of like highlights, that was a low light for me. But Johnny Simmons as young Neil was so fucking funny. Like,
I thought he was a low light for me.
really?
He had a real mush. He had like a lot of mush mouth going on.
For me, it was some of his one-liners though were incredible. Like, just when I discovered I'm a cinephile, like, oh my fucking God, it killed me.
Is that
Or
my
like,
sleep paralysis demon?
For me, the best performance was Satya Baba. I know I can't do the aspirated B's. Sorry to people who know how to actually speak that language. I thought he was amazing as Matthew Patel. He really brought that anime energy.
And good for Matthew Patel for getting
It
so
was
much more
very
screen
camp.
time,
Honestly, I thought that Matthew Patel was a really compelling character in this. Yeah, just definitely reminds me of so many unfortunate dates I've gone on with actors in New York City that made me want to claw my ears and eyes and every part of myself out.
That made you want to run away into subspace and then be terribly surprised when they turn up
Yes.
years later as one of your League of Evil exes. I'm like, oh God, no.
Oh my goodness. Listen. Actually, though, like, I'll tell y'all some other time off pod.
All right, well, we will return in due time to the story of Toni's evil exes on another exciting episode of the anime that is their life. For now, though, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening. This is going to be, if not the last, one of the last podcast episodes that goes out for 2023. So I want to say thank you as well for being along for the ride for this whole year. If you're a patron, of course, thank you so much for helping us keep the lights on. If you're not a patron, but you are interested, you can join up anytime you like. You get a fun range of bonus things like mini recommendations and a newsletter and bonus shorter podcasts if you really, like the sound of our voices and like our opinions. We are also on many exciting social medias. You can find us at AnnieFem on most of them, except for Instagram and TikTok, where we are AnnieFem site. We got merch, we got all sorts of fun things going on, and heading into the new year, we'll be doing some new exciting projects as well. Our submission box is also open if you have anime opinions that you want to tell us about in essay format. That is going to do us, though. I am not going to do a big Broadway closeout. I'm just going to say thank you very much, and I will see you